You do that. Oh, you do.
Welcome back to Iconic TV Rewind. Today, we're cracking open one of Hollywood's most deceptively strange screwball comedies, Howard Hawks' 1952 film, Monkey Business. On the surface, it looks like harmless fun. Cary Grant running wild, Ginger Rogers throwing tantrums, Marilyn Monroe stealing scenes. But behind the laughs is a film filled with censorship battles, casting changes, studio interference, and creative choices so bizarre that even its own director questioned whether it worked at all. These are the 20 weird facts behind one of cinema's most classic comedies. Fact number 1. The director broke the fourth wall before the movie even started. Before Monkey Business even begins, it quietly does something no one expected, and almost no one noticed at the time. As the opening credits roll, Cary Grant casually steps out of a doorway, looking ready to start the film. Suddenly, an off-screen voice stops him. "Not yet, Cary."
Not yet, Carrie.
Grant obediently steps back inside, and the movie proceeds as if nothing unusual just happened. That voice wasn't a studio executive or an assistant director. It was Howard Hawks himself. This fleeting moment marks the only time Hawks' voice is ever heard in any of his films, and it's delivered as a private joke directly to the audience. It's a sly reminder that Monkey Business is fully aware of its own artificiality before the story even begins. Fact number 2, Cary Grant wasn't the first choice. Danny Kaye was supposed to star. As iconic as Cary Grant feels in Monkey Business, the role was never written with him in mind. Originally, the studio planned to cast Danny Kaye as the absent-minded scientist at the center of the chaos, with Ava Gardner considered for the female lead. That version of the film would have leaned heavily into verbal comedy, musical rhythms, and Kaye's rapid-fire delivery. But schedules shifted, contracts changed, and the project slowly morphed into something very different. When Cary Grant stepped in, the entire tone of the film changed with him. Grant didn't play the role as a zany eccentric. He played it with controlled restraint, allowing the absurdity to erupt through his dignity rather than replace it. The comedy becomes funnier because Grant appears genuinely embarrassed by his own behavior. This casting shift didn't just alter performances, it reshaped the film's identity. Fact number 3, the original title was terrible and got scrapped. Before it was ever called Monkey Business, the film carried a title that almost guaranteed disaster. The original working title was Darling, I Am Growing Younger. It sounds polite, sentimental, and faintly romantic. Exactly the opposite of what the movie actually is. There's nothing screwball, anarchic, or chaotic about that title, and it completely misses the manic energy of the story. Studio executives eventually realized the problem. This wasn't a gentle romantic fantasy. It was a film about adults regressing into reckless children, fueled by chemicals and bad decisions. The title Monkey Business immediately reframed the movie as something unruly and mischievous, signaling that viewers were about to watch grown people behave very badly. The change wasn't cosmetic, it was essential. Had the original title survived, the film likely would have confused audiences and softened expectations. Instead, the final title primed viewers for nonsense, excess, and comic rebellion, which is exactly what Hawks was delivering. Fact number 4, the censors forced major rewrites because the formula was too scandalous. At the heart of Monkey Business is a youth-restoring formula, but in its earliest drafts, that formula was far more controversial than what audiences eventually saw. Originally called Cupidone, the chemical didn't just make people younger, it acted as an aphrodisiac, triggering heightened desire, reckless attraction, and sexual impulsiveness. That premise immediately alarmed the Production Code Administration, which governed morality in Hollywood films at the time. A drug that made adults behave sexually uninhibited, especially in a comedy, was simply unacceptable. The studio was forced to rewrite the formula into a vague vitamin compound, stripping away its explicitly sexual implications. But traces of the original idea remain embedded in the performances. The sudden mood swings, flirtations, and emotional volatility still feel more suggestive than innocent. Hawks didn't remove the behavior, he just disguised its cause. The result is a film that constantly flirts with impropriety while technically remaining within the rules, making it feel slightly dangerous even when it's playing things safe. Fact number 5, the iconic sports car sold for over $200,000, with the movie damage still intact. One of the most memorable props in monkey business is the bright red 1952 MGTD Roadster, driven by Cary Grant during the film's most frantic moments. During production, Grant accidentally drove the car into a fence, leaving a noticeable dent in the radiator. Instead of repairing it, the studio left the damage visible in the finished film. Decades later, that same car resurfaced at auction, complete with its on-screen scars. In 2011, it sold for $210,000, largely because of that very dent. Collectors didn't want restoration, they wanted authenticity. The damage became proof that this car wasn't just a replica or a promotional prop. It was a working artifact of classic Hollywood filmmaking, accidents and all. In a strange way, the dent tells the story of monkey business itself, polished on the surface, but permanently marked by chaos beneath. Fact number 6, Debbie Reynolds bought the car, even though Marilyn never owned it. Years after monkey business faded from first-run theaters into classic status, the film's famous red MG took on a second life built almost entirely on misconception. In 1971, 20th Century Fox held a massive auction of Marilyn Monroe memorabilia, capitalizing on her myth rather than her actual possessions. Among the items offered was the MGTD Roadster from Monkey Business, heavily implied to be Marilyn's car. Debbie Reynolds, an avid Hollywood collector with a deep love for film history, purchased it believing it had belonged to Monroe. The truth was far less glamorous. Marilyn never owned the car, never drove it off set, and had no personal connection to it beyond appearing beside it in the movie. The studio knew this, but marketing myth sold better than reality. Reynolds later acknowledged the misunderstanding, but she kept the car anyway, recognizing its value as a cinematic artifact rather than a personal relic. It's a perfect example of how Hollywood legend often outpaces documented truth and how even industry insiders weren't immune to the illusion. Fact number 7, Carrie Fisher nearly destroyed a priceless movie prop. Once the MG Roadster became part of Debbie Reynolds' collection, it also became a tempting curiosity for her daughter, Carrie Fisher. As a teenager learning to drive, Fisher was fascinated by the car's celebrity history and eager to take it out on the road. There was just one problem. The MG was a manual transmission, and Fisher never quite mastered the clutch. Each attempt at driving the vehicle put the car and its irreplaceable Hollywood history at serious risk. Reynolds quickly realized that one stalled engine or misjudged shift could permanently destroy a piece of film history. She confiscated the keys before anything catastrophic happened. In hindsight, it was a wise decision. The car survived intact, dent and all, eventually reaching auction decades later. The near disaster adds another layer to the car's story. Not just a relic of monkey business, but a survivor of Hollywood families, generational nostalgia, and one very close call. Fact number 8. Howard Hawks thought his own movie wasn't funny enough. Despite its enduring reputation, Monkey Business was a film Howard Hawks never fully embraced. In later interviews, Hawks openly admitted that he didn't believe the premise was believable enough to sustain its comedy. The idea of a youth-restoring formula driving adult behavior struck him as too artificial, even by Screwball standards. As a result, he felt the jokes never landed with the force they should have. This self-criticism is especially striking given Hawks' reputation for confidence and control behind the camera. He rarely second-guessed his work. Yet with Monkey Business, Hawks felt constrained by the concept and by studio mandates that softened the original script. Ironically, many modern viewers see the film's lack of plausibility as its greatest strength. Fact number 9. Ginger Rogers was forced on Hawks, and he resented it. Howard Hawks' frustration with Monkey Business wasn't limited to the script. He was also unhappy with one of the film's central casting decisions. Ginger Rogers was imposed on him by the studio, and Hawks never hid his resentment. He believed the story worked best if only Cary Grant's character experienced the effects of the youth formula. Adding Rogers into the regression, in his view, diluted the comedy and distracted from Grant's unraveling. Hawks felt her role was unnecessary and structurally redundant. Yet the studio insisted, wanting a strong female lead and a recognizable star pairing. The tension shows in subtle ways. Rogers' character oscillates between romantic interest and comic obstacle, never fully settling into either role. Ironically, her exaggerated tantrums and childlike behavior became some of the film's most memorable moments. Fact number 10. A 6-year-old with a foghorn voice stole scenes from movie stars. Among the adult stars behaving like children, one actual child managed to stand out. George Foghorn Winslow was just 6 years old when he appeared in Monkey Business, but his impossibly deep, booming voice made him unforgettable. Winslow had already gained attention through appearances on Art Linkletter's radio show, where audiences were stunned by the mismatch between his size and his sound. Cary Grant heard him, was instantly amused, and personally introduced the boy to Howard Hawks. The result was one of the film's most surreal elements, a child whose voice sounded older than the adults around him. In a movie already obsessed with reversed age and distorted maturity, Winslow became a living punchline. Fact number 11, the chimpanzee's real name was Esther, and she was perfectly cast. The true catalyst for the insanity in Monkey Business isn't a scientist, a serum, or a studio mandate. It's a chimpanzee named Esther. Esther was already an experienced animal performer when she appeared in the film, and her role required more than simple tricks or trained reactions. She had to convincingly discover the youth formula, respond to human behavior, and remain expressive without pulling focus away from the actors. Critics at the time took notice, and many later reviewers would argue that Esther delivers one of the most effective animal performances of the era. Unlike many trained animals in 1950s cinema, she isn't treated as a novelty or a punchline. She's integrated into the story as a functional character, quietly manipulating events while the humans spiral out of control. In a film obsessed with intelligence, regression, and unintended consequences, Esther becomes the ironic constant, the only character who seems completely at ease in the madness she creates. Fact number 12. Cary Grant sued the studio decades later and only won $10. By the early 1970s, Cary Grant had largely stepped away from acting, but his relationship with Hollywood studios was far from over. When 20th Century Fox used clips from Monkey Business in a documentary celebrating Marilyn Monroe, Grant objected. He hadn't granted permission for his image to be reused, and more importantly, he believed the studio was exploiting his performance without consent. Grant filed suit and won. The damages awarded? $10. The amount was symbolic, but the victory was personal. Grant wasn't interested in money. He wanted control over how his work and likeness were used. At a time when actors had very little leverage over their screen legacy, Grant's lawsuit quietly reinforced a principle that would become far more important in later decades. Fact number 13. This film is essentially a remake of Hawks' own earlier masterpiece. For viewers familiar with Howard Hawks' career, Monkey Business can feel strangely familiar, and that's because it is. Structurally and thematically, the film closely mirrors Bringing Up Baby from 1938, another Hawks screwball comedy starring Cary Grant. In both films, Grant plays a rigid, intellectual man whose carefully controlled life collapses due to outside forces. In both, chaos is introduced through an animal. In both, social rules disintegrate in favor of emotional anarchy. Hawks wasn't hiding the repetition. He openly acknowledged that Monkey Business revisited ideas he had already explored, only this time filtered through post-war sensibilities and studio constraints. The difference is tone. Bringing Up Baby leans into romantic delirium, while Monkey Business embraces chemical regression and institutional absurdity. Together, they form a strange cinematic echo, two films arguing that intelligence offers no protection against humiliation. Fact number 14. The chemical company building was pure Hollywood illusion. The sleek exterior of the Oxley Chemical Company in Monkey Business suggests a modern, authoritative institution devoted to scientific progress. In reality, no such company existed. The building audiences see is actually the executive building on the 20th Century Fox studio lot. Like so many Hollywood backdrops of the era, it was repurposed, redressed, and rebranded to serve whatever narrative the studio required. This illusion extended beyond architecture. The laboratory interiors, the corporate authority, and the promise of scientific advancement were all carefully constructed to feel legitimate, just long enough for the film to dismantle them. The choice reflects a recurring theme in Hawks' work. Institutions appear powerful, but they collapse easily under pressure. Fact number 15. 3 legendary screenwriters joined forces and still clashed with the code. The screenplay for Monkey Business reads like a dream team of Golden Age Hollywood talent. Ben Heck, Charles Lederer, and I.A.L. Diamond Three of the most influential writers of their time collaborated on the script, adapting a story by Harry Siegel. Each brought a distinct voice. Hecht's sharp cynicism, Lederer's screwball timing, Diamond's structural discipline. Yet even this powerhouse lineup couldn't fully escape the grip of censorship. Much of what they wrote had to be softened, reworded, or stripped of its more provocative implications. The final film bears the marks of compromise, brilliant dialogue navigating carefully around forbidden ideas. The result is a comedy that feels smarter than it's allowed to be, constantly hinting at ideas it can't openly express. That tension between creativity and restriction gives Monkey Business its peculiar edge. Fact number 16. A French critic analyzed this comedy like it was Shakespeare. While American audiences largely embraced Monkey Business as lightweight entertainment, the film received a far more serious examination overseas. French critic and future filmmaker Jacques Rivette wrote an essay dissecting the movie's themes with startling intensity. He admitted that during a packed screening, he found himself unable to laugh, not because the jokes failed, but because he was too absorbed in what he saw as the systematic degradation of Cary Grant's character. Rivette viewed the film as an unsettling study of intellect stripped away, where intelligence becomes a liability rather than a strength. To him, the comedy wasn't liberating, it was destabilizing. This kind of analysis elevated Monkey Business beyond its genre, treating it as a philosophical experiment disguised as slapstick. Rivette's reading may feel extreme, but it underscores why the film continues to invite interpretation long after its jokes have landed. Fact number 17. Ginger Rogers earned a Golden Globe nomination for acting like a child. Ginger Rogers' performance in Monkey Business is deliberately exaggerated, bordering on cartoonish at times, yet it earned her serious awards recognition. She received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy, an unusual honor for a role built around tantrums, mood swings, and gleeful immaturity. The nomination acknowledged the difficulty of her performance. Playing regression convincingly requires precision. Go too far, and it becomes a parody. Hold back, and the joke collapses. Rogers managed to maintain balance, grounding the absurdity in emotional commitment rather than self-awareness. Although she didn't win, the nomination signaled that audiences and critics recognized the craftsmanship beneath the madness. Fact number 18. Howard Hawks called Marilyn Monroe phony. Howard Hawks was famously blunt, and his assessment of Marilyn Monroe during Monkey Business was no exception. He reportedly told Fox executive Daryl F. Zanuck that Monroe was as phony as a $3 bill and didn't belong in serious roles. Yet this wasn't a dismissal, it was a diagnosis. Hawks believed Monroe's strength lay in exaggerated comedy and musical performance, where artificiality became an asset rather than a flaw. The very next year, Hawks cast Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, shaping her image into the knowingly stylized persona that defined her stardom. In retrospect, Hawks didn't undermine Monroe, he redirected her. Monkey Business captures her at the threshold of that transformation, still experimenting with how much artifice audiences would accept. Fact number 19. A famous film historian wished Marilyn had the lead role instead. Decades later, film historian and director Peter Bogdanovich revisited Monkey Business with a critical eye and came away with a bold conclusion. He argued that the scenes between Cary Grant and Marilyn Monroe crackle with energy, far surpassing the film's central romantic pairing. Bogdanovich lamented that Monroe didn't play the female lead, suggesting the film might have achieved something even more volatile had she been given equal narrative weight. It's a tantalizing what-if. Grant and Monroe share a chemistry built on contrast, his restraint against her theatricality that feels electric even in brief moments. The idea that the film could have leaned harder into that dynamic remains one of its most enduring unrealized possibilities. Fact number 20. Ginger Rogers was the oldest leading lady Howard Hawks ever directed. At the time of Monkey Business release, Ginger Rogers was 41 years old, making her the oldest leading lady ever cast by Howard Hawks. This detail is rarely discussed, but it adds an intriguing layer to the film's obsession with youth and regression. Hawks typically preferred younger actresses, aligning with Hollywood's long-standing fixation on youthfulness. Casting Rogers was both an exception and a contradiction. In a movie about aging backward, the female lead was older than Hawks' usual heroines, yet asked to perform childish behavior on screen. The irony is unmistakable. Monkey Business becomes a comedy about youth that quietly exposes Hollywood's discomfort with age, especially for women. And there you have it. 20 bizarre, revealing, and surprisingly thoughtful facts about Monkey Business. What started as a harmless screwball comedy turns out to be a film tangled in censorship, ego, illusion, and obsession with youth. Which fact surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like, subscribe to Iconic TV Rewind, and tell us which classic Hollywood film we should uncover next.